Now, I remember you telling me about a letter that you wrote that talked about what you wanted to do and what kind of a job you wanted to have.
It's amusing because I was 22 at the time and apparently was rather snippy about what kind of jobs I had. And Father had said, well, what kind of job would you like? What do you really, you were interested to know just what kind of job I would really like. I remember that phase very vividly, for I have thought of it a number of times since when I was tempted to pick to pieces one kind or another of legitimate employment. I've tried to analyze the things I would want and find they're about these. Absorbing work, which means putting the best you have in you into it, using your head at high tension. Ethical work, which means you are harming nobody and that your effort is for an end beneficial to humanity as a whole. Interesting work that entails meeting and dealing with people and having a variety of contacts. Well-paid work in which one could expect to become a personage of importance and unquestioned standing in the minds of fellow beings, and work that leaves time for one to enjoy active play. Of course, that's my idea at 22, and I thought afterwards, you know, it wasn't so far wrong.
I discovered journalism through Girl Scouts. I did a journalism badge as one of many I did during 8th grade because school was boring and not very interesting. I learned enough to know that through journalism, I could, if I had to, earn my keep working with whatever field I really got interested in. My mother had said for years that I could be a dress designer, but when I found journalism, it gave me an answer for all of those people who said, "And what are you going to be when you grow up, little girl?" I could say, "I'm going to be a journalist." They just stopped dead when I'd say journalist because they were expecting nurse, secretary, school teacher, or wife and mother. That would have been in the 50s when women really didn't aspire to do more than the tradition, other than the traditional things.
Well, I got into it because, of course, I'm a woman in a minority. Both of those labels would say that I was on the side of the powerless. I just felt that a large segment of our society simply wasn't being heard. And why I decided I should be a messenger is a different, it's something more complex than I can explain here.
I was always looking for that job that I loved, you know, that I would go to work whether they paid me or not. I never found it until I got to be in my 40s. It even baffles me sometimes because I just never really realized or never thought when I went and asked Melvin Whiteigle for a job that he was going to tell me to go down and run a newspaper.
As I grew up in high school and worked on the school paper, the school annual and all that, and thought I might become a newspaper person, my father was not all that thrilled. He said, "I don't want you to become one of those hard-talking news hens. Give me a break." But I did. He really thought it was too tough a life for a woman and too tough a life in general. And many times said, I remember that, my father told me not to do this.
I tried very hard to get on a paper. And of course, we got a woman, or we don't take women, and we have a society editor, and that's what you got. It was rough, tough. It was men's place, and this is a nice girl.
It was a long process, well over a year, of applying and applying. I was told that they just were not hiring negresses on television, but if they ever considered a negress, I would certainly be on his list.
I was quite fortunate in my last year to be able to get a job at KOMO as a news writer. I do remember one of the key things in that interview was, well, would it bother you that you're hired because you're a woman and you're a minority? And I remember friends of mine saying, well, that's insulting. You shouldn't take the job if that's why you're going to be hired. And I said, well, what's wrong with that? It's a foot in the door. And besides, I know I can do it. I can do it, and so therefore it doesn't matter what the reason is. As long as I can get the job and I'm not going to fail in it, I can do the job.
I had been promised a job on the Associated Press, and a few weeks before I was to report to work after I was graduating from college, the boss called and decided were not going to hire any more women. I was out of a job before I ever got one. It took me 6 weeks to get a job because I consistently refused to work on the women's pages, and that's the only place they wanted to put you. And then when I came to Minneapolis, I couldn't get a job on the copy desk where I'd been working in Corpus Christi because I was a woman. They didn't hire women on the copy desk. I mean, it happened to me many times in my career, and I had it happen often enough that I became a feminist. Discrimination produces activism.
No, my first job was my first being discriminated against. I figured that out later, too. My production director, Frank Ketchum, came in one day and said, I feel like I've lost a third of my vocabulary. He says, I have trouble getting things said. I said, I don't know why, Frank. Well, he says, I have to clean up my language. He says, and the guys in the composing room don't think they can talk when you're around because they have to clean up their language. I said, do you really think you know words I don't know? Well, you're not supposed to say some kinds of words in front of women, he said. I said, okay, let me work on it. So the next time I went out to the composing room, I tripped over something and did a goddamn son of a bitch loud enough for everybody to hear. And we never again had a language problem.
They said, well, I could do schools, that they had a woman who did schools, but she left a year or so ago and they didn't do anything about it. So they pulled up a desk from the basement that was the most awful rattletrap thing. And my desk was way in the back, by the back stairs, as close to the outside as they could get me. One day, the big business manager and the publisher came up the back, and the publisher said, what is that wreck there? They said, oh, that was this desk for me. Take it away, he said. So when I came back from lunch, there was no desk at all. And I said, well, where's my desk? Well, they didn't like it, so they took it away. So then I had to sit in what they called the pit, where rewrite and the reporters were, which was all right. And that was exciting to me because I was, at last, on a paper in California, doing news and showing them that I could do it. And since their expectations were so low, you see, they never thought a woman could do anything. You got more credit than you really deserved. I used to tell young women later when they were thinking about it to be careful about that, because if they were half good, you know, or as good as nearly as good as a man, why they would get the big head, because my, we have such an exception here.
I didn't want to be always cubbyholed and doing what we call turkeys, which are the fluff pieces, you know. I mean, I did that for a while. It was good because it got you out, you sharpened your interviewing skills and things like that, so I didn't mind doing it. But when hard news stories came up and I was passed over, I marched right up to the news director and I said, Jack, you need to know that I would like to do these types of stories and I'm fully capable. And he liked that, and you needed to do that. And I think within the news department, there was always discussion about what I was doing and why, but I don't ever remember people saying, you're wrong. It was people saying, well, I never looked at it that way, or I didn't think about those types of things. And that's because, you know, I mean, it was a homogeneous group. It was all white male, and they were talking about the same thing.
And Ian had said to me, well, you know, I can give you the time, but I don't have any staff to produce this show, so if you can get a producer and a director, we'll give you the spot and you can do it. And I remembered when he first told me that, you know, of course I agreed to it enthusiastically, and I left Channel 2, which was down at Jack London Square, and drove directly to the Oakland Main Library where my friend Rosemary worked, and asked her to go with me to the media file, the reference, to look up what a TV producer and a director did.
Research.
So once we found out what they did, then we proceeded to try to produce this show, which I hosted. And
That was your first television?
my first television appearance.
I think that one of the things we're trying to sort out now in work, and you see this with younger women especially, but with companies and work family things, is how can we work effectively and still raise our children and have meaningful lives?
I guess I would say you have to have your head screwed on straight about what you want to do, that it's very difficult to balance a life of journalism and a family life. You don't want to miss the story, you don't want to miss the work you have to do, yet you don't want to miss your kids.
I wonder how women juggle that career and family. It's because many of them are married and have children now. But of course, that whole attitude has changed since I came along. At the time I came along, it wasn't quite acceptable. I think the kind of lifestyle that I lived would not have been compatible in the least with the married life. It wouldn't have been fair to a husband or a family. And I just dismissed marriage as maybe not for me.
It's perfectly possible in a marriage. It's the child or the children that adds the straw that breaks the camel's back. Because in most families that I know, no matter what the age of the participants, the woman is still the one who does the lion's share of arranging and childcare and shopping for food or clothing for the child, who takes the time when the child is sick, and who was the one who was pregnant for 9 months besides, you know. I mean, there's just no way around this. Some of it is biological, some of it is cultural, some of it is hormonal.
I think you have to be flexible. It was hard for me at first to be as manager. Yes, to be as flexible with women as I should be, because I didn't have children. I have a passel of stepchildren, but I didn't have a baby, and it wasn't the primary caregiver. So I didn't know what that experience was, and I had to learn it from other women.
Many of us have gotten to successful places in our lives, whatever that is, and we're finding that that's not satisfactory. It doesn't mean something we thought it would mean. It's not providing us with the kind of fulfilling life we wanted. And what success means to people today tends to be having time, being willing to trade money for time and prestige for fulfillment. That rather than having a title and a job that looks prestigious and may pay a lot, that people want more time for themselves, for their families, for their friends.
We live in a society that is diverse. Most of our major centers are diverse communities in which people have to learn to get along with one another.
I feel as strongly about diversity and hiring minorities in journalism as I do about women. I'm very big on diversifying the newsroom. So, I mean, I think it's all part of the same issue, that the news is reported and written and produced by people who are like readers and viewers, and not just a handful of white guys.
News decisions, there's almost no way your particular viewpoint cannot add something. Because newspapers, as they're constituted now, are a mass medium. Therefore, they need to appeal to a lot of different people. You can only appeal to a lot of different people if there are a lot of different viewpoints going into what content should be. And other than that, diversity is also fun. It's more fun to work in a place where there are lots of different viewpoints, even if some of them tend to be, even if there are flashpoints.
Theoretically, the reason we are here is to give you the value of our insights and our perspectives and our points of view within the context of how you do good journalism. Nobody's trying to be an advocate, but the whole point of bringing people who are different into the newsroom is so that eventually, through the gathering of ideas and observations from a variety of people with different perspectives, you get a synthesis that is probably as close to the truth i.e. objective information, as possible. You can't get it from one source.
You know, I think there are people out there that think that women always covered hard news. And it's so funny, you look at a young woman and you say to her, you know, the women used to write for the women's page. The men wrote the news. You did the features. That the early women on television did the noon talk shows, covered the flower shows, did the fashion shows. They didn't do hard news. They cannot imagine it because it seems so illogical, but that's the way it was.
I mean, I love journalism. I didn't think I was consciously picking it, but I guess I was, because my father's a journalist. But I think it's a wonderful career in the sense of, if you have an intellectual curiosity, it gives you tremendous access to meeting all kinds of people and asking lots of questions and finding out really what's going on in the world.
It's not as tough for women now, it really isn't. But in 1962, when I couldn't get a job, I'm glad now that I wasn't sidetracked into something else, because I really have enjoyed my career and expect to be in it, you know, another 10 years or so. But there's hardly been one day in my journalistic life that I could say, boy, that was an easy day. They're all hard, just some harder than others.
I wouldn't change a thing, nothing, because it's been a fascinating adventure. I think that I have not gained materially, but I certainly am rich in experience, and I have gained a great measure of respect, and I just would not change a thing. If I had to do it all over, I'd do the same thing.
What do you like best about the job?
Oh, I think the variety, and also the fact that that pleasant recurring triumph of triumphing over prejudice, you know. It's always pleasant to be better than somebody thinks you're going to be.